By noon, the ridge looked innocent, a green lung, but every path toward it kinked away like a scabbed river. I had the survey note folded in four, brittle as dried leaves. Stone gate, triangulate from fig tree, hum after rain. The villagers read it once, twice, and handed it back without touching my skin. They would talk prices for salt, goat feed, petrol. They would not sell a minute of daylight after 6. Someone said the ridge sings to the wrong gods. Someone else said the last man who camped there woke up speaking numbers that filled a page like marching ants. At 5:50, shutters went up like eyelids closing. I walked out alone anyway. The forest pinched at my sleeves. Vines bowed under their own gloss. Cicadas rattled as if the air were a drumhead. The note's compass bearings put me on a deer track that smelled of crushed mint and wet stone. I saw no stairs, no lintel, only a tangle where light went to die. So I sent the drone. It rose whirring, a small harmless beetle against a ceiling of leaves, and then the canopy broke. A precise triangle flashed between foliage, not a boulder, not chance, but an angle so clean it scolded the jungle for sloppiness. White glare slid along something polished, then vanished. I steadied the feed, heart beating in my throat. There should have been nothing man-made up here. Yet there it was, a quiet shard, waiting like a key in a lock no living hand knows how to turn. The archive smelled of starch and rain, kind of bureaucratic damp that keeps secrets pliable. A clerk with ink-blue fingers unlocked a drawer and brought me a tube bound with fading twine. Out slid a surveyor's pride. A neat grid of ruins, each square numbered, each contour combed. At the center, though, a paper was a wound. The burn wasn't accidental. The edges curled inward, black kissing brown, as if someone had spooned a coal exactly where the coordinates should live. Beside it, in crabbed script, a sentence that pretends to be dull. Unfit for survey. I traced the grid outward, hoping for a marginal clue, a duplicate, a misspelling, anything that survived heat. There were penciled symbols for cisterns, animal pens, slate quarries, even a schoolhouse foundation. The wound had eaten only the heart. Why aim a flame with a surgeon's hand, unless the center mattered more than the map? The clerk shrugged when I asked about replacement sheets. Fire in the filing room, he said. A long time ago, doors shut, no reports kept. Yet the burn mark's geometry contradicted his shrug. It was too clean, too chosen. Officials archive what they plan to own. They erase what they plan to fear. I folded the map and felt something like absence press my thumbs. Somewhere, coordinates existed once. Somewhere, someone decided the safest number to write was none. The letter is short, important, and tired, dated 1899, stamped with a lion and a crown. It travels in language like a boot through wet clay. Until further notice, the governor writes, patrols will be posted to prevent further disturbance at the site described for reasons of public safety. No name for the site, only a grid reference tucked between commas and a warning to magistrates to discourage amateur inquiry. It reads like weather, inevitable, humorless, and interested in no one's opinion. Historians circle this page like cats around a locked cupboard. A ruin is normally a picnic for surveyors, not a threat. Stones do not riot. Columns do not ambush. If the hazard were bandits, the letter would say so. If disease, there would be quarantine orders and Lyme. Instead, we get a foggy word, safety, hung like a curtain over something specific. Who whispered what into which ear? A district officer who broke into a sweat in a cool room? a chaplain who listened to men return from the ridge with odd dreams and noses bleeding a thread, an engineer whose compass turned sulky and untrue. The letter does not answer. It does not need to. It closes a valley with ink, and the valley obeys. Public safety can mean anything. Here it meant silence, fewer footprints, fewer questions, fewer chances for the hum to be heard again at night. His diary begins like a love letter to stone. Harmonic masonry, he writes on Monday, sketching little ribs of wall that pinch sound like a flute. He notes a floor that gathers footsteps into rings of dust, a corridor that answers a hum with a lower hum, as if the building is listening back. Tuesday, he adds, we shall test tone lengths. Then the ink grows jumpy. By Thursday evening, the diary becomes a stranger. Misidentified rock, he declares. No structure of note. He pastes a leaf over Monday's sketch and writes across it in red pencil, error. The leaf is not quite big enough. Corners of the drawing peek out like guilty ears. What takes a man from music to silence in 3 days? Perhaps a supervisor with a thin smile. Perhaps a late visit from the governor's aide, reminding him of postings, pensions, and the difference between curiosity and insubordination. Perhaps something less human, a night in the small basalt room where the pulse slows and the air thickens, where thoughts arrive too tidy. On Friday, he lists equipment returned, dates receipts, and records the weather. No mention of the word harmonic again. His last line about the ridge is ordinary. The hill is merely rock. It reads like a password, he has been taught to say without blinking. An index card in brittle ink promises 8 glass negatives from the ridge, numbered and logged. The archive box holds only 2, wrapped like thin cookies. Both are overexposed at the same diagonal, a veil of light slanting across stone as if something refused the lens and answered with glare. The missing 6 might have been the clear ones, the angles that showed what administrators did not want outsiders to see. No one destroys all evidence when a bruise will do. They remove just enough to steer the story. So we have 2 dazzled plates and an absence that feels deliberate. I hold one to the window. Under the wash, the triangle emerges faintly. Edges too clean for nature, a seam at the apex where something once nested. The clerk mutters that glass breaks, and yes, it does. But the index still lists 8. And the handwriting after each includes a specific exposure time, a camera, a field remark. Paper keeps count when people grow vague. Why the identical flare? Why at the same angle? Did the stone answer sunlight, or did the photographer try to bleach a secret with brightness? The record does not say. It only leaves a suggestion. The plates that mattered learned to vanish, and the ones that stayed learned to blind. When records go dark, stones keep talking if you learn their language. The first step turns the floor into a whispering instrument. A thin skin of wind-blown sand lies over shallow rings carved into the stone, the sort of detail most eyes dismiss as decoration. I move, and the grains reorganize as if obeying a memory. Hairline ridges rise, spokes appear. A necklace of tiny islands forms around my boot print. When I stop, the shapes hold. When I hum, they sharpen. A low note breeds a flower. A higher one knits a lattice. It looks like magic until your chest answers. I scatter a pinch more sand and walk the circle slowly. The pattern follows me, fixing itself whenever I cross certain arcs, blurring when I slip between them. The building chooses which footsteps matter. If I clap, a ring near the center wakes like the skin of a drum. What kind of temple plays its visitors like a tuning fork? I kneel and set the recorder on the floor. The levels tremble at specific spots. calm at others as if the stone wants only certain conversations. No one can agree what power the ancients meant to cradle here: prayer, healing, warning. But the room behaves like a machine that prefers song to speech. You feel it in the body first: a settling at the sternum, a slow tilt in the inner ear, a lean towards the exact note the room secretly wants. What if the switch was never a lever at all, but a chord the walls remember and crave, even now in silence? The inlays look like stars that fell and chose to live as stone. Brass pins, quartz flecks, and dark basalt circles pepper the floor, in a pattern that means nothing until you sketch it. Lines appear the present sky refuses to wear. Orion lists, the Pleiades wander, and a bright marker sits where nothing bright sits now. Precession is a slow drift, in the heavens shuffling their chairs a finger's width each century. If the floor is a sky, it is not ours. Overlay an ancient chart and the misfits settle. Constellations tilt into their older postures. Dates creep backward beyond the official timeline. What kind of builder aims a building at a night thousands of years away? Some pins nest inside the ring where dust forms standing patterns. Hum, and the sand piles precisely over those points, as if the floor prefers them. It feels like a lock that waits for two keys: tone and time. What if the temple was designed to wake only when the heavens reach their remembered alignment? When certain stars threaded apertures above and spilled their light onto these markers? Either the place is older than the books allow, or someone younger copied the elder sky to hide an instruction in plain view. Two grooves lead from the ring to slots in the wall, as if to catch dawn on solstice mornings. No one agrees whether they are ceremonial or functional, but the geometry insists on purpose. At the apex, the stone stops pretending. A shallow socket sits where two planes meet, notched like a nest for a piece that is gone. The edges shine not by weather but by years of contact, as if a fitted object once turned there and drank the room into a point. Ghost lines run down from the empty cradle, faint polish on ribs, a bright seam along the angles, paths where fingers or currents once traveled. A grain of metal glints in a crack too small to name. Villagers say the keystone left with the men who made the hum stop. Carts under canvas, mule blindfolded at the ford. What failed the day it left? For a season, the well at the lower farm tasted iron bitter. A beekeeper swore his hives rerouted. Two compasses developed a wobble. It could be weather, it could be a story. Yet the absence feels engineered. A single wire snipped so the board goes dark without breaking. The room still listens, but without its focal piece it cannot quite reply. The walls gather the breath. The floor gathers the note. The emptiness at the crown swallows both, for now it only remembers and waits. If the plane is on the floor, the engine hides in the walls. The first chamber answers like a throat. Clap once and the echo refuses to scatter. It thickens, drops, and settles in the rib cage at roughly 110 cycles a second. Hum with it and the walls forgive mistakes. Miss by a breath and your voice phrase. At the right note, the room becomes generous. Peripheral vision softens. Footsteps feel buoyant and breath lengthens on its own. You enter skeptical and leave counting heartbeats. That seems slower than when you came. Instruments confirm the room's preferred pitch exactly. This isn't cathedral romance or a lucky cave. The joints are tight, the angles slightly disobedient to right angles, the ceiling dipping by increments that look random until the sound chooses them. Nodes and quiet pockets bloom exactly where masonry swells. Someone mapped pressure with a mallet in memory. then built patience into stone. A 2 on a tuner reads 110 hertz. The chamber doesn't care about tuners, it cares about bodies. At that pitch, shoulders unload, thoughts unspool, and a clean, low tremor braids the spine. Ancient builders shouldn't have known these tricks, yet their choices behave like engineering. Crescent patches where the wave would kink, narrow slits to bleed higher tones, a floor that answers yes when the note is right. What if that frequency isn't pageantry at all, but a key? The first turn in a lock that only opens when the human voice remembers how to start it. From the main chamber, a colonnade darkens into a choir you cannot see until you speak. Basalt tubes stand shoulder to shoulder like organ pipes, some hollow to the throat, some capped with thin stone lids pierced by pinholes. Blow across an opening, and the answering note nests inside the others, a chord that feels ancient and unreasonably right. Strike a drum at the doorway, and certain columns wake while others fall silent, as if an invisible conductor is lifting and lowering a hand. No one can explain why their lengths fall into tidy families that mirror wave math, 2 to 3 to 4, fifths and fourths, octaves doubling clean. Measuring them feels like trespass. A chord becomes a tape. A shadow becomes a rule. Ratios repeat. Even their diameters scale with those same obedient ratios. Even the gaps between tubes make sense only to sound. Who drove them? Breath would do. So would hides and sticks. A line of drummers walking slow. So would the sky. In storms, wind finds the mouths and turns the colonnade into a low parliament of notes, the wall answering weather with tone. That isn't decoration, it's design. Behaves like memory. The tubes gather, filter, and steer. The thought arrives plain. These are not pillars. They are instruments captive in stone, built to be played by patient hands or by thunder. Why carve a choir unless the music served a function no altar ever could? The small room sits aside like a pause, barely wide enough for 2 shoulders. Basalt blocks drink sound until speech lands soft as cloth. We clipped a finger sensor and a smartwatch and took turns occupying the square. After 6 minutes, our pulses drifted down in neat steps, 10 beats, then 12, while breath grew slower without the usual edge of air hunger. The effect held when we kept still and returned when we tried to talk. The room rewarded quiet like a patient teacher. Skeptics ask for controls, so did we. Outside, under the same sky, wind, heat, and insects tugged the heart upward. Inside, the chamber untugged. An odd organization crept through the ribs, as if someone smoothed the sheet of the chest and tucked its corners. Thoughts stopped stacking. They aligned. Call it placebo, but the instruments ignore hope. The walls answer noise with a deeper hush. The floor carries weight toward the center, and the ceiling lowers just enough to ask a bow. Was ancient power a field of charged air, or something simpler and stranger? A state deliberately engineered, a switch for attention, a medicine you take with the whole body? Sound leads to flow. Every channel here tilts toward one place, and even the quiet seems to slide, a pool waiting to hold another kind of current. They called it a libation trench, a ceremonial gutter for oils and milk, and for decades the label settled like dust. When we brushed the channels clean and lifted the residue, it flashed metallic, dull, heavy, reluctant to leave the pan, the way mercury darkens a spoon. Thin grooves braid toward a central bowl, some shallow as veins, others beveled to quicken flow. At junctions, the stone dips into palm cups, catching eddies, cooling them, sending them on, again and again through silent years. Under oblique light, The floor shows a gloss where liquid ran, a mirror smeared into grain. The basin's rim is scratched in arcs as though something dense circled there, never quite still. A guide might call it a mirror for gods. The mechanics whispered another word: heat. Drag a finger along a groove and your nail sings against grit that clings like filings. Pour water and it hesitates at spots matching the standing tone's nodes, then slips when you hum. It behaves like a loop. Take in charge here, shed it there, carry fever to the bowl, and let a river of metal steal it away. Legends praise sacred silver, offered and reclaimed. What if devotion was a euphemism and the offering a working fluid? What if the ceremony masked maintenance and the gleam below our feet was coolant, conductive, mobile, dangerous, kept moving to keep something older from waking? They cataloged it as an idol, a black stone with iron bones, then wrapped it in cotton and piety. Bring a compass near. The needle slides a degree, then 3. Leaning toward a north inside the rock, we packed it in a Faraday cage. Even shielded, the pole persisted, soft but insistent, like a glove tugging a sleeve. Crack faces show flecks that answer a magnet with tiny leaps. The mass is denser than it looks, a seam of iron oxides and something harder, slick in a few veins. If it were ritual alone, why would geometry matter? Yet edges line with grooves in the floor, and one flat facet aims at the empty socket above, as if stone once spoke to stone through a field we dare not name. Call it lodestone, and you name a toy. Call it a shunt, and you step into a vocabulary that makes curators nervous. The thing rests where current would gather if the temple were a generator, absorbing, redirecting, preventing a surge from cooking its own heart. Place metal shavings nearby, and they creep into ordered fans. Tap it, and the fans tremble, then rest. No textbook admits a machine here. Yet the black stone behaves like part of a circuit, a deliberate path for force the builders learned to tame. Who taught them to manage that river? And why did later hands pretend it was only a god that needed flowers? At first the vents read as ornament, thin mouths cut into stone, some slanted upward, others kissing the floor, neat as stitching. Then the weather changed. Hours before the storm reached the ridge, a cool thread crept from the low slits. Hair rose. A strip of ash pinned to the lintel shivered as if remembering how to be smoke. The temple seemed to inhale pressure and exhale charge, preparing before the sky spoke. We held a foil streamer near a vent and watched it lift, drop, lift again, steady to a rhythm that matched the far thunder. The tubes in the colonnade hummed without touch. The floor's sand grew nervous, drafting ghostly spirals, then holding still like breath before a dive. Fine grains snapped to edges and clung there in combed lines, as though an invisible hand was arranging filings on a magnet's face. Could this be a way to milk the sky? A roof designed to drink field, a body built to bleed it through veins, a bowl meant to collect and cool? No one can agree on purpose, but the behavior refuses to be merely ceremonial. The place prepares, channels, and calms, turning storm into work and work into hush. If power ever lived here, it still knows its root. Where there is power, there are hands that covet and other hands that bury. The valley still remembers both. The manifest listed cameras, plates, a barometer, 2 field radios, and enough tea to outlast a monsoon. By the time the team walked back out, the crates rattled with only notebooks and silence. The porter said lighter, the surgeon said wrong. Faces looked sunburned, eyes glassy. Conversation clipped to yes, no, later. One man who arrived joking in 3 languages left speaking barely 1. They had gone in as scholars in pressed khaki, measuring tapes dangling like lianas. On day 1, they mapped the colonnade and laughed at the echo games. On day 2, they tested the ringed floor with footsteps and drums. On day 3, their notes suddenly break and restart with military verbs: secure, seal, restrict. Cameras are mentioned once, then never again. When asked, the leader coughed and called the weather uncooperative, yet the barometer trace is calm, the radio's logged fair reception, and a pencil stubbed through the paper where someone pressed too hard on the word access. A private letter home, found later among estate papers, carries 4 words only: we woke it once. They met the governor that evening and agreed to close the entrance for the duration. The phrase belonged to war, not a hillside. Whatever happened underground taught scientists to speak like soldiers, the way daylight teaches the shape of a trap. Archivists call it the Cheese Memo because 3 black stripes chew through the middle like bites. Dated 1942, typed, it refers to a field test, successful, not repeatable, risk to morale. And then the teeth begin. 3 lines blacked, the remaining words read like somebody trying not to breathe. Temporary uplift, metallic effluvium, personnel rotation. No further demonstrations without ministerial direction. Successful at what? Not repeatable because unsafe, or because the apparatus would not answer twice. Annotations in pencil whisper questions the typist refused to type. Time to peak, conductive medium, alignment window. In the margin, someone drew a triangle and underlined the word resonance twice. The test site location is redacted, but the inventory list is not. Drums, cables, a mercury thermometer the size of a flute, ear defenders, gauze. The phrase risk to morale is old bureaucratic code for men came back rattled. Witness notes from the neighboring station report nightmares that synchronized uncannily, headaches that rose when storms approached, and a rumor that livestock down valley lay down all at once and would not rise for an hour. A single verb survives in one of the bites: flickered. The temple, or the thing inside it, came on like a bad light and showed them just enough to push men who loved order toward the language of awe. Then the note wraps itself in cold caution and logistics. Cold again. What if the machine only needed voices and weather and a missing stone? And what if for a minute the recipe came together by accident? They tasted power. It tasted back. From the air, the strip looks like a scar, straight and pale against the green. Aerial photos from 1943 show it arriving from nowhere. A runway bulldozed within marching distance of the ridge. 2 sheds, a windsock, and a fuel dump that appears in one frame and is gone in the next. Locals remember weeks of engines, then deep quiet, then grass taking back the edges. Why build a runway for nothing? The manifest lists no cargo, only personnel, and even those rosters stop and start like a cough. Weather logs cite convective interference, which could mean storms or something else behaving like storms. One pilot's logbook mentions a compass error on approach that corrected only after wheels touched dirt in wind. Ground crews noted static in headsets. Rumors tell of night flights with no lights, of a crate in oilcloth guarded by men who didn't share a language, of barrels rolled off an aircraft onto sleds bound uphill. Then orders shifted. The sheds became empty ribs, the strip cracked, and the jungle began to pucker it shut. Airstrips grow where value moves. If nothing of value was going in or out, the value sat in the hill itself. If power was tasted and feared, the next chapter asks what the temple was built to do. In the first place, the corridor that drinks sound holds the only bones. Not many, careful bundles and shallow niches, small as if weight mattered at the end, but clustered where the pulse slows. A field osteologist listed healed ribs, knitted wrists, vertebrae with a satin sheen of people who hurt, a long time and then began not to. It reads, less like a cemetery than a waiting room that kept its last appointments. Charcoal loops on one wall resemble breaths counted. The soot smears at shoulder height. Someone sitting and leaning back. The floor remembers circles from mats or litters dragged in pairs. In a corner, a jar lip tastes sour as old metal. The coin tongue of salts used to stop blood. Bleeding stopped here, an elder said, if you lay quiet and listened. If the temple tuned bodies as easily as it tuned tone, slowing hearts, quieting nerve, then forbidden might mean the cure answered to no priest, no schedule, no tithe. The corridor gives its favor to anyone who enters and obeys its rule of stillness. That is medicine made dangerous to power, democratic, contagious, unwilling to distinguish rank. Later hands called it ritual, wrapped the truth in incense and warnings and posted men to keep the desperate away. The word endured like a warding charm, but its root was utterly simple. Fear not of blasphemy, but of relief that would not submit to owners. Scorch kisses run along the vents like old lightning tattoos. Each mark aligns with a slit in the stone, darkened in tidy bands rather than wild licks. Under raked light, the soot pulls into arrows that point inward toward the ringed floor. And the bowl, as if the wall once shepherded something hotter than flame. During storms, the tubes hum. Why not invite the sky to speak and give it a path to ground? The pattern is wrong for torches, wrong for cooking, wrong for careless campfires. It repeats at measured intervals at ratios the colonnade prefers for tone. Someone timed discharges to architecture. In one recess, the stone has vitrified a palm-sized glazed blister. Another shows pockmarks like hail that arrived from inside out. A brass peg halfway up has bloomed green. The stain trails to a groove that feeds the central bowl. Thunder has rules, so does this. Historians balk at the phrase domesticated thunder, yet the fittings behave like a laboratory that could harvest storm. Lure field with apertures, rouse the organ with wind, let the rush find metal and run. A clay shard shows a scratched swirl villagers call the tether. Elders say you could stand in the wing, count to 7 after the flash, feel hair lift without harm. Who tamed a sky with no wires? And what else did they learn by trial and fear? The roof opens like a script, slits, eyes, narrow fans, each cut angled as if to drink particular pieces of sky. Stand beneath at noon and nothing aligns. Stand at dawn on certain mornings and the light threads the building like a needle. On a solstice, the first beam lands on a brass pin in the floor, then ricochets to a panel we once thought decorative. Dust there glows, revealing a crowded chipwork of tiny mirrors. At rare conjunctions, 2 apertures throw twin spears across the nave that cross on the ringed floor where the sand draws its faithful circles. The temple behaves like an optical instrument pretending to be a shrine. The old charts we overlaid for the underfloor constellations suddenly matter overhead. Aperture angles match the star positions of a sky that belonged to another epoch, when those long cycles bring the heavens back into posture at last. The room truly answers with a geometry of light and sound as if carrying on a conversation paused for centuries. Maybe it broadcast. Maybe it listened. A scorch above the apex socket suggests something once flared there, a lens or stone that focused signal into the waiting air. If this was a beacon, who was meant to see it? Neighbors beyond the ridge, travelers far off at sea, or others who knew the code hiding in angle and tone? The past whispers, the present decides. Someone tries to wake the temple again. We set the speakers at dusk, square mouths aimed at the basalt tubes. The program was simple. Low sweeps, pauses, then sustained notes at the chamber's favored pitch. At the first tone, the colonnade took the sound and returned it heavier. A thrumming shook leaf litter into herringbones. Birds lifted in a sheet and settled along the forest rim like punctuation. Insects froze mid-scribble and went silent. We paced the nave with meters blinking numerals. Needles climbed when we crossed certain arcs, then sagged where the sand usually draws its circles, as if the floor was telling us where not to stand. At the third sustained note, the tubes began to sympathize, each finding a voice, then a harmony no modern scale recognizes. The hill carried it to the trees passed it to the river, which trembled without moving. A dog howled, choked on its own sound, and stopped. The tone kept breeding tones. The room learned our language and corrected our accent. We had come to make the temple answer to us, waiting for a reply we could trap in volts and graphs. The reply arrived suddenly, sideways. The sound used our speakers as kindling and bloomed into a choir we could not conduct. It felt polite and indifferent, as if acknowledging us while listening for someone else. What if the temple can still answer, just not to us? We couldn't pour mercury, so we mixed a dense proxy that flowed like it and kept a dulled shine. Pooled in the central bowl, it lay flat until the low note returned. Then the surface shivered into narrow corridors that crept toward the vents as if drawn by breath. We tilted nothing. The liquid leaned anyway. Under light, the paths showed as silver threads, branching and rejoining, a map sketched by motion. They converged in the same wall slots the storms prefer, on grooves that taste metallic to the tongue. Whenever the tone brushed its favored pitch, the threads brightened and quickened toward those mouths. Wrong note, the mirror slumped. Right note, the bowl remembered a job. We sifted charcoal over the floor and watched the liquid drag it into filigree. The design matched our tracing of the ancient inlays, pins, rings, and brass stars, even at eddies where old markers lie. Silence held. Accident can mimic once. It cannot copy instruction. If the proxy obeyed, what would real mercury do? Move faster? Climb? Would it carry charge the way legends claim the Silver River did, ferrying heat from an engine we quietly pretend isn't there? No one can explain why the flow maps duplicate the old pattern, except to admit the building remembers its roots and uses any mirror it can get. The first sign is ordinary. A phone refuses to lock, then locks itself. The second is not. 3 compasses spread like a fan and begin to circle, then agree on north that isn't north. Our laptops blink, buffers reset, a file name turns to squares. The air prickles like a sweater pulled over hair. We hold the tone longer. The tubes answer with a chord not on any chart. A crackle runs through the valley, not sound, but its ghost. The way the world feels a breath before lightning. The foil streamer at a vent lifts and leans. Ash on the lintel sketches combs. For 1 minute, watches drift, radios hiss, a pen clicks twice. The proxy mirror trembles toward the slots and then relaxes as if embarrassed. Someone says stop, someone else says keep going, we are close. We ease the volume down, the cord unbraids. Compasses halt like dancers freezing at a whistle. Air tastes like rain on a coin. Every meter returns to normal. As if ashamed of its panic, we look at one another with a smile people use at funerals and weddings, unsure which event we almost attended. Did we turn the key, or merely jiggle it in a lock that remembers who it belongs to? Power awakens consequence. Every switch has a price stamped on the other side. They leave with different losses measured in faces. Priests in Chronicles describe fevers after night vigils, dreams that replace names with numbers, a humming silence that follows home. Centuries later, engineers report the same in cleaner language: insomnia that sands temper smooth, balance that tilts on stairs, a taste of iron water cannot wash. The sight does not cut or bruise, it edits. One archivist began repeating the morning's date whenever he tried to introduce himself. A surveyor lost the habit of calling north north and had to relearn it like a child. A porter who lingered at the quiet room's mouth forgot the word for goat, then remembered, then forgot again, trading nouns for calm. Wives wrote to superintendents and to priests, pleading for transfers, for blessings, for something to blame. The temple devours attention with courtesy. You mean to observe, you are observed. You bring instruments, they falter. Stay a week and you begin to move at its tempo, pausing at certain arcs, stepping wide of others, a hum caught behind the teeth. What if the first offering was never blood or grain, but the mind itself? A tithe paid in tiny edits, concentration siphoned, sleep borrowed and not returned. The ledger of payment is long, paid by anyone who lingers, and none of the receipts name the payee. The valley belongs to many maps at once. To villagers it is medicine and warning. To investors it is a grid disguised as myth. To scholars it is a long question between dates. Around the same fire they agree on rain and prices, then part with different futures in mind. Villagers want the silence kept, not from superstition but from memory. Storms that veered, crops that steadied after processions through the quiet wing. Elders who knew which note eased fever and which chord are calmed, shaking hands. Investors arrive with models and promises. They offer clinics, roads, and schools, the price folded into exclusivity. They speak of patents on ancient geometries, of devices tuned to the chamber's frequency, of clean power in partnership with heritage. Their engineers request samples, then access, then a cordon, explaining that safety requires control. In the pitch, partnership begins to sound like custody, and custody like ownership dressed in ribbon. Scholars want time. They ask for seasons to separate story from structure, for slow excavation, publication, and consent written in village hands. The villagers hear requests to wake hum and call it research. The investors hear delay and call it obstruction. Each suspects the others of dressing appetite in virtue. Who decides when a culture's sacred engine becomes the world's next grid? Council, minister, courtroom, or boardroom? If the temple heals, who prices relief? If it stores a storm, who owns the lightning and who pays? The law is a ghost that still signs papers. Buried in a colonial statute book, between tariffs on salt and rules for timber, a clause survives. Fines for interference with restricted antiquities, sites deemed injurious to public safety. The empire that wrote it is gone. Crests hang in museums. Its officials are photographs with cracked smiles. Yet the clause endures, revised quietly into modern code, wording softened, teeth intact. At first it reads like protection: do not loot, quarry, or torch the past. Then you see the catch: designation by ministerial notice, locations withheld, appeals limited. A map can be erased by decree, and the erasure become legal. Archivists shrug and say continuity. Villagers say police still watch market days for reasons no one speaks. Investors learn permits wander, meetings slip, files misfile, phones sleep. Why keep one switch off for a century unless someone remains afraid of it coming on? Perhaps the fear is habit, perhaps it is memory. Old cables coiled in a shed, a box of glass plates gone missing, a report with holes that still chill the room when read aloud. The statute is not superstition, it is policy embalming a lesson. Certain doors will not be opened by private enthusiasm, kept alive by long caution. Laws leave ledgers behind them, fines paid, bail posted, appeals refused. With the ledger tallied, only the question remains: what do we dare do with a door that might open? It is the simplest answer, and perhaps the laziest. A temple, a stage for belief, a place where stone and ritual conspired to impress. Resonance as spectacle, vents as incense chimneys, channels for pouring libations that glinted like metal in the light. Oh, we could tuck it all into the category of human pageantry and close the file, yet the sums resist it. Ratios buried in the tube's lengths match harmonic laws only rediscovered in recent centuries. The stones carry frequencies that do not occur by accident, their nodes placed with obsessive precision. The scorch marks are too disciplined for torches, the missing keystone too purposeful for theft alone. Even the burn on the map is as geometric as any floor plan. If it was only a temple, it was one designed by people who understood the sky's precession, the body's response to tone, and the behavior of liquid metals under vibration. That knowledge should not have lived in the hands of the culture to which we assign it, and yet there it sits, cut into rock, asking us to believe in coincidence or accept an older competence. Maybe our need for wonder makes us invent a purpose where none exists. Or maybe our need for certainty keeps us blind to the fact that theater can sometimes be the mask of function. The other answer sits in the teeth like a seed. It was never theater at all. The builders may have known the sky's drift, the frequencies that calm the pulse, the way a certain alloy will carry heat away from a core. They may have shaped every chamber, vent, and groove to make earth, sky, and body part of one patient circuit. Imagine the keystone focusing light on the floor's inlays while the tubes sang to the storm, the vents pulling pressure into channels lined with a river of quicksilver. Imagine a current not measured in volts, but in some other medium, older, slower, meant to build instead of burn. If that was the intention, then we have rediscovered only the opening page of its manual. The hum, the patterns in sand, the pull on the compass. The rest may wait for conditions we cannot yet repeat, or for a hand steady enough to turn the lock without snapping it. No one can explain why this thought feels both like a warning and a promise. A machine can serve or destroy, and the line between them is often just a change in operator. If this was always a machine, then its long sleep is either mercy or suspense. We end where we began, on the ridge, under a ceiling of leaves, the drone's camera catching a triangular glint. The vines part just enough to show a sealed door, stone tight in its frame, a seam only visible when the light falls sideways. Stand close, and the hum returns. A slow, almost breath timed to the distant roll of thunder. It rises a fraction before the first drop hits your shoulder, as if aware of the weather's approach. Instruments twitch without touching it. The air is cooler, the hairs along your arm standing to the same rhythm as the unseen pulse within. We do not know what lies beyond. A Another quiet corridor for the sick, a nest for the missing keystone, a chamber that has been waiting centuries for the right sky and the right note to wake. If this was only one survivor, what else is still buried? Hills with their own sealed doors, plains with their own hums. How many have we walked past without noticing the breath underfoot? The temptation is simple. Bring the key, turn it, see. The caution is simpler still. Once opened, some doors, remember the hand. The hum follows you back down the trail, low and patient. The choice is yours. Leave the switch alone, or return knowing it may be the last time you decide for yourself.